Good evening. You're watching The Big Story with Dylan Ang. I'm Olivia Quay, coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom. Ahead on the show, we speak to our bureau chiefs on the COVID-19 outlook in China, as well as Malaysia's new cabinet lineup.
But first, more than 600 passengers disembarked from the Costa Fortuna cruise ship in 3 hours as of noon today, and all have been found to be well. Passengers who have been to areas affected by the coronavirus in the past 14 days have also been individually screened by doctors and are certified fit to travel.
These passengers are remaining on board and will be later taken directly to the airport for their flights. Journalist Toh Ting Wei was at Marina Bay Cruise Centre when the ship docked this morning, and he files this report.
We are outside the Marina Bay Cruise Centre, where we are checking on the status of Italian cruise ship Costa Fortuna. The ship has made the news recently after it was turned away at the ports of Penang and Phuket due to the fears of the new coronavirus. It docked at Singapore at 7:30 a.m. today, and is the only ship docking here. The cruise centre is otherwise shut off to both the public and the media. Costa Fortuna has started a 14-day cruise from the Marina Bay Cruise Centre, where it is based, late last month. It was scheduled to stop here this morning at 9 a.m. It last stopped in Singapore on March 3rd as part of a scheduled stop. Reports have stated that there are about 60 Italians on board, with about 2,000 people in total. As of 10:30 a.m., around 200 passengers have left the ship in 10 buses. Most of the travellers seen were from England, Belgium, Germany and Austria. A few of the passengers we spoke to said they didn't notice anyone unwell on board. Precautionary measures, such as temperature taking, were also taken. After loading their luggage, they were taken to Changi Airport and various hotels. Almost all of the passengers have been living in buses, and we haven't seen anyone walk out to the waiting taxis yet. Costa Fortuna was supposed to start on a new cruise from Singapore today, but its operator, Costa Cruises, has said that it has cancelled the trip. So it is unclear where the ship will be heading to next. While it has been penciled in to depart from Singapore again on March 19 for a trip to Savona in northwest Italy, the status of the trip is unclear given the developing situation there. Toh Ting Wei, The Straits Times.
It was reported earlier this evening that the trip from Singapore to Savona has been cancelled as well. Moving on, the World Health Organization has praised Singapore once more for its all-government approach in the containment of COVID-19. Singapore has 160 cases, 93 patients have been discharged, but 10 are in the intensive care unit. There have been no deaths.
On Monday, the Health Ministry announced that tourists and other short-term visit pass holders have to pay for COVID-19 treatment. Singapore will still waive testing fees for these short-term visitors, but they will have to pay for treatment if they are warded.
The government will continue to pay for Singapore residents and long-term pass holders who are admitted to public hospitals for treatment.
Moving overseas, Canada has recorded its first death from the coronavirus. The victim was a man living at an elderly care facility, but its age is not known. The whole of Italy is in lockdown as the number of cases surges. It's the first country in the world to attempt a nationwide lockdown.
The death toll in Italy is edging towards 500, with the number of confirmed cases surpassing 9,000. Italy is also suspending its top-flight Serie A football league until April 3rd.
Over in the US, President Donald Trump has yet to be tested for COVID-19, even as his incoming chief of staff and at least 4 other GOP lawmakers put themselves in quarantine. This after coming into contact with an infected person at a political event. The White House said Mr. Trump has neither had prolonged close contact with any known confirmed patients, nor does he have any symptoms.
Meanwhile, the spread in South Korea seems to be slowing down, with 35 new cases reported today. It's the lowest daily rate of new infections in 11 days. The total number of confirmed cases there is inching towards 7,500, with 54 deaths.
China reported 19 new confirmed cases, but no new locally transmitted cases outside of Hubei province for the 3rd straight day.
Well, joining us now with the updates on the situation in China is China Bureau Chief Tan Don-wei. So, Don, 0 locally transmitted cases outside of Hubei province for the 3rd straight day. President Xi Jinping himself paid his first visit to Wuhan since the crisis erupted in January. Are these all pointing to an improving situation in China, or is it still too soon to say, Don?
Yes, these are very clear signals that the situation in China, especially in Hubei province, is pretty much under control. President Xi's visit is symbolic, but definitely not unexpected. It was only a matter of time that he visits Wuhan, and now that they've gotten a grip on the outbreak and the numbers are stabilizing, it is possibly the best time for Mr. Xi to visit. We can expect that they may soon dial down the prevention and control measures. In fact, just today, Hubei province announced that it is easing its lockdown by implementing a color-coded health rating system that would allow residents who are considered healthy to travel freely within the province. And perhaps quite soon too, we may see China declare victory over this fight against the coronavirus outbreak.
Wow. So while the spread of the virus within the country has slowed in the last week, China is growing more aware of the threats of imported cases either by foreigners or locals returning home from hotspots. So what have authorities been doing to address these concerns?
Well, the number of imported cases are still low, just 69 cases from overseas so far. But yes, they're definitely keeping their eye on travelers coming into the country, especially those coming from South Korea, Japan, Iran, and Italy. In Beijing, for instance, people coming from these countries will have to be quarantined for 14 days. And all travelers entering the major airports, such as the ones in Beijing and Shanghai, will have to fill in a health declaration form and have their temperatures taken. But the situation is fluid and the rules seem to be shifting from day to day. At one point, it was announced that anyone coming into Beijing will be subjected to quarantine. And then a few days later, the authorities relaxed those regulations by exempting people who have been away from China for 14 days or more. But just yesterday, they again toughened these measures for foreigners, telling them to minimize unnecessary outings.
Well, 12 of the 14 temporary hospitals in Wuhan have closed. The remaining 2 are due to shut today. Do you think this is premature? Because how will the city cope if a second wave of cases hits?
Yeah, well, there's not much point in keeping them open, the beds are empty. The situation in Wuhan has gone from acute bed shortage to at the height of the epidemic when there was something like 2,000 over new infections a day to just 19 cases yesterday. And the Chinese state media describes it as going from 人等床, which means people waiting for beds, to 床等人, which means beds waiting for people. So in the worst case scenario, should there be a second wave of infections, which I think is quite unlikely, these makeshift hospitals can come to life again because the infrastructure is there. What they simply did was to convert gymnasiums, exhibition halls, schools into these treatment centers.
Right. Okay, so moving on, some cities have reported 0 cases. Do you think this is an accurate assessment? Is there any way to know if these cities are still conducting tests?
Well, China will always have its detractors, who question whether the numbers are too good to be true. And to a certain degree, some of that cynicism stems from China's long-standing instinct to cover things up, whether it was SARS or in the early days of this coronavirus outbreak. But I don't see how it would fudge the numbers at this point because of all the intense scrutiny that it is under, just not just nationally, but more important, domestically. Because in this current climate, I would say it would be almost impossible for the authorities to play down or even cover up any clusters or small-scale outbreak because people are so unhappy and they're so sensitive to this issue. And even though I think China may be close to declaring victory over this crisis, it is still not entirely out of the woods yet. And I think it will stay vigilant in keeping up social distancing measures and ferreting out suspected cases to be tested and treated. Because the last thing it wants is to let the reins go too quickly and too much and risk another outbreak, especially given how contagious COVID-19 is.
Well, Dawn, on Saturday, a hotel in Futian that was used to quarantine people collapsed. 20 people were killed. Do you have an update on the 10 people who have yet to be rescued?
Yes, unfortunately, these 10 people are still trapped in the rubble and rescue work is going on around the clock to try and locate them. After the building collapsed on Saturday night, rescuers pulled 61 people out of the wreckage, while 9 others escaped on their own. There have been about 1,000 firefighters who have been deployed to do search and rescue work, and the National Health Commission, which is the Chinese health authority, has also sent 18 medical experts there. But the window to finding these 10 people is narrowing because it's been 3 days since the hotel collapsed.
Right. Many thanks for joining us, Dawn. I've been speaking to China Bureau Chief Tan Dong-wei. Keep up to date on the COVID-19 situation worldwide at straitstimes.com. Dylan, it's over to you.
Over in Malaysia, Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin unveiled his cabinet on Monday evening. His own party, Parti Pribumi Bersatu Malaysia, as well as UMNO, dominated the new Perikatan Nasional lineup, but Mr. Muhyiddin did not appoint anyone to the hotly contested deputy premiership. Instead, Mr. Muhyiddin created 4 coordinating minister posts in a move he said would ensure a functional cabinet that will deliver service that is more focused. These are called senior minister positions.
One of them is filled by former Parti Keadilan Rakyat Deputy President Azmin Ali. He was named International Trade and Industry Minister and the Senior Minister in charge of the economy.
And as indicated by Mr. Muhyiddin last week, no politician with ongoing graft charges was appointed to cabinet, like former Premier Najib Razak, UMNO President Ahmad Zahid Hamidi, and former Secretary General Adnan Mansor. Now, Malaysia Bureau Chief Shannon Teoh joins us live from Kuala Lumpur. Shannon, nice to see you again. So instead of appointing a Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Muhyiddin creates 4 senior minister positions in his cabinet. What do you make of this?
Well, I think it's a great move strategically for the Prime Minister. There had been a lot of noise about who would take up the Deputy Prime Minister position in the week since he was sworn in as Prime Minister. The loudest noise came from UMNO. Of course, they're the biggest party in his Perikatan Nasional coalition. So by doing this, Muhyiddin kind of diffuses the tension regarding this position. He has 4 senior ministers. What he's trying to say is that they are not going to be the next Prime Minister. These are not my successors. But these are guys, I think, that can take care of their portfolios, whether it's economy, security, education and social affairs, and even infrastructure development. So he kind of allows the top figures from each of these parties, from each different faction, to say, well, whoever's going to be the Prime Minister, you guys have to duke it out yourselves, but I'm not going to be appointing an heir apparent.
But do you think that the de facto number 2 could actually be Azmin Ali? As we heard earlier, he's going to be the International Trade and Industry Minister as well as Senior Minister for the Economy.
Well, whoever is in charge of the economy is usually in the best spot. In most other countries, a finance minister is usually seen as a potential future prime minister. Of course, for Mr. Muhyiddin, picking Azmin, an ally, a key figure, and someone from his own party is important. Basically, because you don't want other parties to have the position where they can chair cabinet meetings when you're not around. So obviously, he's got out of the 4 senior ministers, 2 of them are from his own Bersatu. One is relatively junior. He's the Bersatu Information Chief. Azmin, we know, has been around. He was the Economic Affairs Minister before. And he's a key figure in setting up the Perikatan Nasional government. So in a sense, yes, he is the de facto number 2 as far as Muhyiddin is concerned.
Now, Shannon, let's get back to Mr. Muhyiddin for a moment. Now, his own party, Bersatu, like you mentioned, has 10 ministers in the cabinet lineup. UMNO has 9. Now, what's your assessment of how Mr. Muhyiddin has divided up the portfolios predominantly between these 2 parties?
Well, these 2 parties are the largest in his coalition, so naturally you expect them to have the lion's share of positions. To make UMNO happy in that sense, it's given them some pretty good portfolios as well. Their vice president is the defense minister. Defense is one of the main portfolios. It gets a huge budget every year, and there's a lot of resources which will be in charge of. It also allows UMNO to burnish its credentials, its image. It always talks about being a defender of the country. So giving them not just the defense portfolio, but making Ismail Sabri the senior minister for security, that allows UMNO to play that role, as a kind of a vanguard for the country. The Prime Minister, of course, had to reward his own party members, his own loyalists. So that's why they get quite a number of cabinet positions. But so far, we haven't heard about anyone really being unhappy with what they've gotten. You can't please everyone, but at least you don't have a coalition that is unhappy 1 week into your government.
Well, Shannon, Mr. Muhyiddin has also created a new portfolio for Sabah and Sarawak affairs, which comes under the Prime Minister's department. Why the move to give Sabah and Sarawak greater representation?
Well, it's been a long-standing complaint and grouse from the two East Malaysian states. They say that for decades now, they've been neglected. They've not gotten the same amount of development. And further, there are certain provisions in what is known as the Malaysia Agreement 1963, when all these states came together to form Malaysia, and that they were supposed to get a certain level of autonomy, certain rights to tax revenue and things like that. They say that none of this has been adhered to. And so they have been trying to get the federal government to come to a table and negotiate these many different things. One of them is petroleum rights, and as we know, that means a lot of money. So the previous two governments, the Barisan National Government under Najib and the Mahathir government with Pakatan Harapan, made some small steps towards it, but it was never satisfactory to people in Sabah and Sarawak. Muhyiddin is basically trying to win over these two states now, trying to make his base there really solid by saying, I'm going to have a minister who's just going to be in charge of making sure that Sabah and Sarawak are taken care of.
Shannon, just a final question. Mr. Muhyiddin also put non-politicians in charge of finance and religious affairs, like CIMB's former CEO Zafrul Abdul Aziz, who's the new finance minister. What's the impetus for those moves?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, finance ministry is a very powerful role, and if you give it to a politician, that guy is going to be very well positioned to be the next prime minister. So in one sense, this is a strange move, because you could use the finance ministry to reward someone very handsomely. Instead, what it does is that he avoids the problems that Mahathir faced when he was prime minister the past 21 months. He had a finance minister who sometimes was doing things his own way. Lim Guan Eng had his own way of managing the coffers, which Mahathir didn't always agree with. He had a religious affairs minister who critics said was too liberal, for much of the more conservative Muslims that we had in Malaysia. Not just that, for the education ministry, that portfolio was also problematic for Mahathir. He had a minister who was widely criticized for various different policies. Now, Muhyiddin was also put in a loyalist, as we mentioned, the Bersatu Information Chief, Razi, as the senior minister in charge of education. So Muhyiddin seems to have identified these three problem areas for the previous government and ensured that there are going to be people who are loyal to him. You've got Tengku Zafrul, who is a technocrat, Malay professional. He's got no political ambitions. He's there just to carry out and execute the agenda as best as he can. The religious affairs minister is actually the Mufti from KL, seen as quite moderate by Malaysians. So he wouldn't really do things which are going to upset a lot of people. So Muhyiddin's basically made these appointments to try and keep things calm, not face the same kind of problems which kind of get in the way of actually governing. A lot of these issues that history portfolios face in the last government were just a lot of political noise rather than actually helpful kind of discourse towards governance.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Shannon.
Sure.
Let's take a quick look at what's making headlines beyond our borders. The MH17 plane crash trial has opened in the Netherlands almost 6 years after the plane was shot down by an anti-aircraft missile over eastern Ukraine. 3 Russians and a Ukrainian are accused of murdering 298 people. The defendants did not show up in court, but proceedings were watched by family members of the victims.
Prince Harry and Meghan Markle joined members of the British royal family for a Commonwealth Day ceremony in London. It's their final public engagement before stepping back from their roles on March 31st. Come the end of the month, they will no longer use the Royal Highness titles or use public funds except for their security.
And those are our top stories for today. For more news and videos, visit straitstimes.com. And once again, I'm Dylan Ang with Oliver Quay. Join us tomorrow for more stories on The Big Story.